So good afternoon, folks. My name is Larry Reagan. I'm one of the co-directors of the Center for Online Innovation and Learning, COIL. And on behalf of COIL, I'd like to welcome you to our fourth COIL Fischer talk. As you know, COIL sponsors leading thinkers in the area of online education, innovation, technology, pedagogy. And we're really pleased today to have Jose Ferreira, who is the CEO of Knewton. This is an adaptive learning technology platform, and very exciting, lots of potential and possibilities here. And Jose has asked that I not do too long of an introduction. I have 3 pages here, and he said, no, don't do that. Just tell him where I'm from. So welcome to Penn State, Jose. And as you know the format, I'll just go down through that again. We are on Media Site Live, so we have people joining us at a distance. So Jose knows he needs to sort of stay in a particular area for the camera. So if you have questions, we've asked Jose for maybe a 35, 45-minute talk, and then we'll have some dialogue and conversation. If you have questions, just please come up to the front. I'll be monitoring, for those of you joining us at a distance, I'll be monitoring the computer for any questions that come in that way. And I like to say that I'll do my Shirley MacLaine channeling, and I'll channel our program to our guest outside. So. Thank you for taking time. I know most of you are here because it's 94 degrees outside, but we always like to say it's a good day in Happy Valley. So welcome, Jose.
Great. Hi. It's an honor to be here. Thanks very much for having me. So I thought I'd just cover a bunch of different topics that may be of interest to the audience, such as I understand who's here. I thought I'd cover previous revolutions in education, and very quickly, and talk a little bit about big data and education and what that means. Talk a little bit about maybe MOOCs, because you're probably interested in those, and then just open up to questions. So just general stuff. It's really your time, so I'll spend it however you like. So I'm going to start by trying to describe why I think online education is so important. I think it's the most important thing happening to the human race today, and here's why. I think that the whole history of the human race can be summarized as a history of education technology, education innovation. And I think I think each education innovation phase throughout human history has defined an era or an epoch, and that has basically dominated every smaller historical event that happened in it. And so starting with, modern Homo sapiens emerged in Africa about 200,000 years ago, biologically modern Homo sapiens. And then nothing happens for 160,000 years or so until the invention of language, which is the first killer app for education for the human race, right? Which, I mean, sometimes when things are very far in our rearview mirror, we get so used to them we don't think that, we forget why they're so special. But everything changed with the invention of language, everything. Tool use, ceremonial burial, cave art, population exploded, that's enough right there, migratory patterns. And then not much happens again for about 30,000 years, and you get the invention of numeracy and writing. And people attribute the first civilizations to the really modern agriculture, the invention of modern agriculture. But modern agriculture is itself entirely possible because of numeracy and writing. And suddenly you can maximize crop yields, and you can pass that knowledge down, and blah, blah, blah. And animal husbandry. And that's when you get the first civilizations. And both of those kind of happen all over the world, right? So they're not geolocated in any particular area. And then you start getting some that are confined to certain regions. So you've got the invention of the textbook around 10,000 years after that, about 8,000 years after, so a few thousand years ago. And that happens not so much in Mesoamerica, but it happens in Europe, Middle East, and China. And so the great civilizations of China, the Middle East, Al-Khwarizmi invents algebra, puts it in a textbook. Plato and Aristotle become the textbooks for the next millennium in Europe. And you get those great civilizations, Greco-Roman civilization, etc. And then the next one is interestingly confined to Europe. It's the first one that's just located in Europe, but that's the printing press, right? And so Europe had not really been the dominant civilization prior to that. It was up there, but one can make a case that it wasn't the greatest at that time. But the printing press changes that. And so up until then, education was the king's children and other very rich children get private tutors, and they get handwritten texts, Aristotle and Plato. After that, a much greater audience, so now it's in petty nobility, gets those handwritten texts, and the whole rise of the European merchant class follows, and the Renaissance and lots of other things. And then the last one, the most recent one, is what I call the factory model of education, because I haven't thought of a better name. And I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. It just happens to look like a factory. So in the early days of the Industrial Revolution, we kind of realized in the rich nations of the world, well, heck, if we systematize this, because education has always been defined by how expensive it is on a per capita basis. It's horribly, horribly expensive on a per capita basis, so very, very few people have it, or have the quality of it that they need. And if we systematize it, so forget this kind of like everybody's got a governess, that's not systematized, it's much too expensive, or if it's a schoolhouse, they're all kind of the different grade levels, well, that's ridiculous, that's too expensive. If you systematize it, you can push down costs per capita to such a degree, it's still expensive, but you can push down costs to such a degree that you can institute compulsory K-12 education in the West. Compulsory K-12 education is a revelation in history. Literally every single aspect of the modern world is a result of compulsory K-12 education. I defy you to come up with a single example of anything that isn't defined by compulsory K-12 education or the lack thereof in the developing world. Every invention, everything about your life is a result of that. So that's pretty exciting, I guess, except that we turned schools into assembly lines and kids into widgets. So I tried to, we have a research team in Newton, and we tried to estimate what effects, on basic literacy and basic numeracy these epochs had. This is almost blind guesswork. What we thought happened to civilization at the invention of the textbook. Printing press begins to be a little bit less blind. And then once you start getting to the late 1800s, you start getting much better data. And so the point is, as well as we keep thinking we're doing, because it looks like it's a big jump every time, every invention, when you kind of normalize it out to 100%, you see it's getting better, but it's not the big jump it appeared to be at the time. And where we are today is about 55% of the world's kids, 1.25 billion school-aged kids around the world, 55% or so get the equivalent of primary education, what the American equivalent of that would be, so 6th grade or beyond. And about 22% get the equivalent of a high school education. So it's as far as we've come as a species, the human race is still doing pretty badly in terms of basic education. And the reason is because, again, education is a horribly, horribly expensive product on a per capita basis. And Derek Bach has this wonderful quote, the old president of Harvard. I mean, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. And that's why it's worth so much effort. But it's very, very expensive. And so much of the world doesn't have it, which is amazing because if you spend time in the developing world, I was born in the developing world, it's not like it's some big secret to them, like what they should do to get out of the developing world. It's like, I was born, my family's from Mozambique. It's like they know, well, they should just build a first world education system. They just can't do it because the payoff is in 20, 25 years, and it's incredibly, incredibly expensive, and they just can't do it, right? But these cycles have been going on for hundreds of years. Like, they know what to do. It's not like it's a secret. So that's where we are. And what's going to happen with online education is within a generation, that's where we are now, within a generation, we should be able to get that 55% and that 22% up to about 100%. And that's not to say that there's going to be bricks and mortar schools all over the developing world. The developing world is going to do with education infrastructure what it did with landline telephony infrastructure. It's going to not skip it, but average it down using online. It's going to significantly average down the cost of the infrastructure of these systems. You remember, so like the developing world, they just went right to cell phone, right? There's still landline telephony there, but they skipped a lot of that infrastructure because that landline telephony infrastructure is expensive. Landline telephony infrastructure is effectively free compared to the price of education infrastructure. Building a school in every single village in a poor country it's just an intolerable cost. It's incomprehensible. So, but you can buy every kid in Nigeria an iPad for about $30 million. So that's a small percentage of even Nigeria's education budget, or a manageable percentage. So that world is going to come. And where online education, where there's no good education locally, online education will provide a replacement product. Now, no one thinks it should be a replacement product where there is good bricks and mortar education. It should be a supplemental product. But where there's no good bricks and mortar education, or virtually none, it will be an entirely replacement product. And we will beam the world's great teachers, whether live or archived, we will beam them to, or a country's great teachers, we'll beam them to every kid in that country. That will happen inside of a generation. So the world is on the verge of momentous change. I mean, every single one of these five eras has changed the entire world, not subtly. It's changed it totally, utterly. It's changed everything, art, science, technology, and because those things build on top of everybody else's advances, it's an exponential effect. Well, we're about to increase by about 3 or 4 times the number of the percentage of the population globally that graduates from high school. So if you think, so here's the way innovation happens. In most industries, innovation is tiny little steps that are basically invisible, no one sees them, and everybody builds on top of those innovations. Okay, great. Well, so we can't really measure that because it's hard to see, but everybody can see the innovation that happens when you got like a Louis Pasteur or an Albert Einstein or a Michael Jordan. We are losing about 3/4 right now of those great geniuses around the world. Right now, there's some girl growing up in some fishing village in Cambodia who is a prodigy. She's a genius. She'd invent a cure for cancer if she had the chance, but she'll never have the chance because she's not getting more than a 3rd grade education. Well, that's going to change in a generation. We're going to unlock. We've got 4 of our arms tied behind our back as a species. We're going to unlock that in the next generation. So there's a human cost to all of us. All of us have been touched by cancer, and we're all, we're wasting 4 times as many people who could help us make those advances. And the reason we do it, and the reason there aren't people marching in the streets with pitchforks to complain about it, is because it's always been like this. We all grow up in this system. We're completely immunized to thinking outside the box. But it's a ridiculous system. You'd never build a system like this straight from scratch. So that's what it's going to do to the developing world. And in the rich nations, every big advance in education does the same thing. It increases access in where people don't have it, and it improves quality where people do have it. As much as people decry the factory model, the developing world would love to have it. And the factory model is going to get a lot better. So that's what we're all working for. Okay, let me skip a few of these. Yeah, okay. I'm going to skip all that stuff for a while. So that's where we are in terms of what we think online education is going to do, and why the stakes are so high. What I think that's going to do to higher ed, Clayton Christensen has this famous prediction. Some of you may be familiar with it, that half of higher ed in North America will be purely online by, I think it's 2021. And that might be a little bit of an aggressive number, but it's beginning to tip pretty quickly. And the idea is you'll go to school, and you'll have half your classes locally, and you'll have half over the internet. And that's obviously a very gross average. So for some people, it'll be 100% are live, live in center and in person, and for others, it'll be 100% are live online, and so on and so forth. But every kid's going to go and have some classes they take in their dorm room. And why are they going to do that? Well, let's say I'm a student at Penn State, and some professor who's really good for my major happens to teach at Berkeley or Carnegie Mellon or something, right? But I didn't want to go to those schools. I wanted to go here, but now I can take that professor's class. So that's great. Well, let's follow the numbers. It's like the old Deep Throat thing. If you ever saw All the President's Men, follow the money. Well, let's follow the money about this economic transaction. So CMU or Berkeley offers a class. They charge more or less the same rate, $4,000, whatever it is. And they get to do it live online, which is, if you do it right, much more profitable. And the kid gets to put Berkeley or CMU or on his or her resume and gets to take that course that maybe he or she didn't get the choice to take at whatever, Penn State in this example. And so the school offering the credit sure seems to do well. They get a bunch of extra high margin revenue. They're not selling their brand at all. There's not necessarily any brand implications to offering suddenly excess capacity, right? Because they're just offering credits. And what about the school that receives the credit? What's in it for them? Well, the school that receives the credit just gets to make a $250 processing fee for accepting that credit, whatever they set it at. The kid takes the course in a dorm room, so capacity on campus isn't changed. You just admit a few more students to keep the yield the same in terms of classrooms. So everybody wins. The kid gets to take a course he couldn't otherwise take. Maybe he gets to put an extra brand name on his or her resume, Stanford, Harvard, Oxford, whatever, or just take some professor who's some great genius and that isn't available on his or her campus. The receiving campus gets to make 100% of margin revenue. Well, that's pretty awesome, just for accepting the credit. 100% margin, that's pretty hard to beat in any industry. And the campus sending the credit It just makes a bunch of high margin revenue. Everybody wins so fantastically well in this system that it's pretty obvious that it's going to accelerate. And what does that look like? Well, there are something like 3,500, I've been told, 3,500 schools of higher education in the United States. And I think, again, Christensen said that's going to be something like 100 or something in 10 years. I don't think that's quite right. But there'll be fewer. There'll be a lot fewer. There are still an incredible number of obscure schools that probably no one in this room has heard of, serving all kinds of local, regional communities. They exist. They kind of exist hand to mouth. They're sort of just barely making it. A lot of the schools are going to go away, unfortunately. Those who survive are going to turn into curation institutions. So you'll take some classes live and locally because that school does that well still, and they have a kind of they've got connections with local employers. They're prominent in the community. They have a little bit of a local brand, and then they're going to curate exceptional online experiences as well. That's the way those schools will survive. Or they'll try to do what Southern New Hampshire University is doing, which is just figure this out ahead of time, get online right now, and develop such a strong online brand that they can survive this storm. And those who don't do one of those things or the other are just going to go away. Other schools that are big schools right now will get smaller. So the really big schools are just going to start sucking up like gravity wells. They're going to start sucking up students from the local environs. So a student who might now, let's take the Penn State example, a student who might now live 2 hours away from Penn State isn't going to go to Penn State every single day. They're just not going to do it. They're going to live at home. They're just too far outside the radius of like what's practical in their life. And so I talk to these students all the time. It's just amazing, but they'll take a much inferior brand that happens to be 10 minutes away from their house rather than just going to Penn State. Right? In 10 years, those students don't do that. They don't make that choice anymore. They drive to Penn State 1 day per week. They suck it up for the 2 hours, and the rest of the other 4 days they do it online. So the big schools like stars are just their gravity well is going to increase over the next decade, and they're just going to suck the oxygen. And you guys are going to be one of the winners here. Suck the oxygen out of a lot of the local, the small local schools. Expand the radius, the catchment radius. You'll make a lot of money in live online courses selling into Saudi Arabia and China and the Middle East, all over the Middle East and the Far East and South America. Where you've got a very strong brand. You'll just take credits here and in some cases degrees there, and I would be very surprised. So I think what's going to happen in higher ed is that it's going to be reduced to this is a really unfortunate because it's not necessarily a positive thing, and it's certainly I'm going to quote a movie which is just sort of an unhappy movie, which is Glengarry Glen Ross, when Alec Baldwin is saying, first prize is a Cadillac, second prize is a set of steak knives, and third prize is you're fired. And the first prize here is these kind of mega church schools, of which the Penn State system and ASU will be another, and maybe UMUC will be another, are going to get really, really big. A lot of online students, and I wouldn't be surprised if the winners in that space had between 500,000 or maybe over 1 million students in 10 years. In fact, I'd be very surprised if there isn't a school in America that has over 1 million students in 10 years. That'd be very surprising. There'll be another segment, which is the very elite brands, which will go online slower in some cases. In some cases, they won't. So we're talking to 1 or 2 elite brands now that are surprisingly aggressive and ambitious, and they're not going to offer it for free. They're going to sell it. And they'll make lots of money. Everyone's going to make a lot of high margin revenue in the system. And then after that, and I think what will happen. My guess is, if I had to guess up around pricing, I think that the mega church model, the giant institution that has 500,000 or 1 million or more students, is going to they're going to be competing with other schools of comparable size, and they're going to have a lower price because they're competing for students and because they can because they're still doing so well. And so I think net, the price of college education will come down because those institutions are going to serve most of the students. I think the elite schools that, right now, the elite brands are irrationally priced from an economic model. Harvard should not be charging what it charges, or Princeton or Yale it should be charging twice that much. People would pay it. They could fill their class, I promise you that. So why don't they charge it? It's economically irrational. They don't do it because they don't want the political fallout and they just make their money through endowments and stuff. But freed from being the poster child for bad behavior for college prices, because college prices net are going down, the elite schools will raise their price. They'll raise it to what's more economically rational. I'd be surprised if the top 50 elite schools in the world aren't twice the tuition they are now in 10 years. So that's what I think is going to happen For the not-for-profit schools, this isn't being recorded, right? This is all off the record?
It's all off the record.
Okay, good. Well, that's a relief. The for-profit schools, for-profit higher ed, are going to be really challenged. Forget the challenges they have now. That's nothing. They're going to face an existential challenge. And the reason for that is, if you're a big for-profit university, right now the market isn't aware that by the market I mean students, that they can take Penn State World Campus. I mean, sure, part of the market's aware of it, but the large market is not aware of that yet. They're not aware that they can take ASU online or UMUC or any of the other fine online courses. They're better education, infinitely better brand, and because the big state schools have this unfair advantage, and it's a huge advantage in brand, right? When was the last great education brand created in the United States? I mean, like higher education. You know, I don't know, was it Cornell? When was Cornell founded? In the 1800s somewhere? Anyway, the point is, it wasn't in the 1900s. It was a long time ago. Any institution that has a state's name in its brand has a structural advantage versus University of Phoenix. It's a huge advantage. And there's just no reason, if you can get into, and do a degree or credits online at a state college, that you'd ever, it's certainly not more expensive. It's a much better, I remember I worked at Goldman Sachs, which is a terrible, terrible mistake. I don't recommend it, for a few years after business school. And a bunch of the partners came from Penn State and Georgia State. The great state schools produce geniuses all the time. Everyone knows it. And so those are great brands. And, the for-profit brands can't compete with that. So they're going to have to either, they're going to have to radically change their business model or just go away. I just don't see another alternative for them. And by radically change their business model, I mean, go even further down market. So they've sort of brand locked themselves already into the bottom of the market. But they'll have to go even further down market. That's one strategy. It's a pretty unattractive strategy. They'll nichify into more obscure technical subject matters, kind of vocational schools. They'll move more into that direction or entirely into that direction. And one or two are contemplating, I've got to believe, I don't have a lot of inside information here, but I've got to believe that one or two of them are contemplating just radical changes, like they're going to try to blow up the model, like, much cheaper credit hours, but they'll try to make up the difference in volume or something, things like that. And some of them are trying to invent new softwares and try to turn themselves into technology companies, and that's not going so well because they're not good at that kind of thing. So that's what I think happens in higher ed. Another kind of notable thing that's going to happen in higher ed is that institutions are going to start competing globally in a way that they don't understand right now. So, I spent a lot of time overseas talking to higher ed institutions there, and they have no clue what's going to come down the pike, and they just literally have no idea. They think that they can just totally ignore online education and they'll be fine, and that's unlikely for a few reasons. So, Cambridge and Oxford don't think of themselves as competitors of the top American schools, but they're about to become competitors because. If Harvard ends up making $1 billion a year, which they could easily make, in online credits from Europe and the Middle East, well, then there's going to be a lot of articles in the British papers about, oh my gosh, what on earth are Cambridge and Oxford doing? And they're going to be making so much money that they can just start buying the best professors from around the world. They can just start buying students, paying them full freight. They can do whatever they want. It's just a cash cow, and they'll be able to spend it to improve the bricks and mortar rankings. If you're making a ton of money in this pot over here at online, you can just spend it to juice your bricks and mortar rankings. And of course, the schools will do that. The schools that get there first, the schools that, and the schools that never get there are just going to go into kind of a death spiral. And that's going to help the American schools compete because no schools around the world are doing this yet. There's one or two in Australia that are beginning to sniff at it, but no schools in Europe. I mean, Europe is remarkably behind the eight ball in terms of online education. And they seem perfectly content to stay that way, as far as I can tell. So that's what I think higher education looks like. K-12 is going to be different in that there's no brand sensitivity in K-12. No one cares what the brand of their sixth grade German class was. It's like, oh, you got yours from Phillips Exeter. Wow, Like, no one cares, right? So that's not going to happen in K-12. But people will take a lot of online classes in K-12, just like you're going to go to an institution and take a bunch of classes live and in center with a great professor who's really good at that thing. You're going to do that in K-12 as well, and it'll probably skew higher as it gets older, right? So, but kids especially are going to take more language classes than that are available to them right now. You know, when I went to school, and I went to public school in Pittsburgh and then Chevy Chase, Maryland, the only languages available to me were French and Spanish, and that didn't start till 7th grade, which is way too late to start. I mean, this is not, and it's like the brain science on language learning is really clear on this. It's crazy the way we do it. And so you're going to have really young kids start taking Mandarin or German or Arabic, and that's going to happen at scale starting in the next few years. So they'll take 1 or 2 online courses, and then as you get into high school, you might take half or more. But it's not going to be the percentage that college will ever take. The last thing I'll say about this is I'm going to go back to higher ed for a second. And I'm going to kind of go back to, I'm going to use factories as an analogy. In the 1800s, many factories produced every single part on site. Today, that's utter insanity. The idea that you produce every single part on site is ridiculous. It's like the stupidest idea ever. No factory, you'd immediately go out of business. Right? Factories just get parts from all over the world. They produce some parts on site, and they assemble their bit, and they move it on to the next factory. And colleges are, forgive the euphemism, colleges are factories of learning. And that's not a bad thing. If they weren't factories, they'd go out of business immediately because it'd be even more expensive. Like, it's the factories' optimization processes that allow you to do it at the relatively low cost that you do it at, given the extreme complexity of what you're offering. And right now, colleges think they've got to produce every single part locally. And they think that because there's never been an alternative. And that alternative is about to change. It's changing really quickly now. And the people who figure that out, we should be offering what we do best to everyone else and get compensated for it. And they should offer what they do best that we don't particularly want to do or we're not as good at. They should offer it to us. And that's what the future is going to look like. And it's coming very, very quickly now. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to talk about MOOCs for a minute because I'm sure you all are obsessed with MOOCs. And I think MOOCs are fantastic, but I think people don't understand why MOOCs are fantastic. So MOOC just means massively open online course. So what Georgia Tech did the other day with its CS degree, where it announced a partnership with Udacity, which is a big MOOC company, to offer, I think, a master's, I think it's a year-long program for $7,000. That is not a MOOC. That may be offered by a MOOC provider, but it's not a MOOC. It is a massive. It's not an open course. I'm not sure how massive it is. I think some of those classes might end up being somewhat small. Although at that very aggressive price, I think they've got to keep those classes still pretty big. But there's going to be, if it's for fee and for credit, it is not a MOOC. And if it's small, it is not even massive. It's not even an OOC. It's not a whatever. Anyway, the point is, you're going to have a lot of schools offering small private online courses to their own students, and some of those will be really good, and they'll sell those to other schools or to other students at other schools. And some of these courses will be massive, and some will be small, and that's fine. What the MOOCs are going to do, part of the reason people get confused about the MOOCs is because there's 2 different dimensions, and they're really high on one dimension and really low on the other, and so they conflate those 2 things. So MOOCs are very high in the social utility dimension. That's off the charts. The idea of getting the world's great professors and sharing them with kids in Mozambique, that's incredible. That's going to change the human race. That's wonderful. That's not a business. That's just a wonderful thing. And in terms of the quality of the experience and the brand, we've talked about how powerful these brands are. People are going to happily pay to get a better experience, both in terms of learning experience and also a social and kind of maturing experience and all the things you get at the college experience. They can pay for that, and they'll be happy to, and they get the brand. So the MOOCs will never disrupt that. I don't think they're trying, and if they are, they'll fail utterly. That's not going to happen. What the MOOCs can do is, as a replacement product for people who have nothing, that's very useful. In terms of the business, the idea that their first business model was they were going to certify a few hundred, the top performing students and sell it to employers. Yeah, that's probably a real business, but it's probably more like $1 million opportunity. It's not a big business. That's not gonna be where they settle out. Where they're going to settle, the biggest commercial value they add. So they add a lot of social value. We talked about that. That's wonderful. The biggest commercial value that MOOCs add is as lead generation for marketing. So what I mean by that is, we have a very regimented system. It's a factory system. People graduate from college, they go into the workforce, and then they're lost to the system. They're lost to the formal education market. They're invisible. It's always been like that. No one's really paid attention. But why does that matter? Well, a lot of those people want some more, and there's no way to market to them. You can market to your alumni, and if you're Penn State, you can probably do that pretty well because you've got a lot. But there's still a lot of people out there who'd love to take some courses, and they're utterly invisible to you. Well, MOOCs make them visible. You offer a big MOOC on data science or on, running a small business in the developing world. Whatever you offer MOOC on, you're going to attract people from all over the world. These people are 45-year-old accountants in Spain, or 16-year-old computer scientists who are so bright that they can take your data science course, and what have you. They're everybody in between. And you're recapturing this aftermarket, or in the case of the 16-year-old, it's not really an aftermarket, but you get the idea. It's like this large kind of invisible market. You're able to capture it now. But you gave them the MOOC. That was the deal, right? That's how you captured it. But then what do you do? Well, then you say, would you like some fries with that? Would you like to take, now that we are on our database, we know you're interested in computer science, or we know you're interested in learning how to run a business in the developing world, would you like to take for credit and for fee, but a reasonable fee, and you can price differentiate between the first one and the developing world, that's fine. Would you like to take a little bit of entrepreneurial finance or something else, right? And that is going to be fantastically useful. And by the way, it's a good thing. That's a social utility as well. It's just a for-profit one, right? Because politicians talk constantly about retraining, career retraining, because we live in such a dynamic economy now. People talk about it all the time. They've never been able to solve it. They never moved an inch towards solving it. And the answer is because there's no mechanism in place. But there's never been a way to bridge the aftermarket with, and the needs of the aftermarket with a service that can help the aftermarket. And this is now a mechanism. And that's a very, very useful commercial value as well. It's just not one they're going to get. They're not going to be. There's no MOOC that's going to become Google. It's not. Most of the value is created for you, and you will share a little of it back with them. But it's like a marketing channel, So that's more or less where the MOOCs are headed, which is a great thing. They're also, in terms of, it's helpful to me because they're encouraging schools to get online, which I think is a good thing. So that's MOOCs. Now, the Internet does exactly two things. It only does two things. Every dollar of value created on the Internet was created in one or the other of these two ways. There is no third way. At least no one's ever been able to show me one. And those two things are distribution and data mining. You can distribute things fantastically well on the Internet, whether they're goods or services or information about goods or services anyway. And you can personalize via data mining. And that's not to understate how important those two things are. They're incredibly important. So Google revolutionized the distribution of information. Facebook revolutionized the distribution of social information. Amazon revolutionized the distribution of retailing information. Every industry that has an information-based product, or a product, that's the wrong word, a product that can, at least in part, maybe in large part, be reduced to ones and zeros and sent over the Internet or a mobile device, that industry, history proves, history teaches us, it is inevitable it will be revolutionized. That's the online, the Internet education is having its Internet moment, and nothing is going to stop that. And look at every other information, digitizable industry. Every other one, without fail, except for video, has already succumbed. It's been totally laid waste to and rebuilt. And industries that aren't information industries but have a big information component or digitizable component, like travel, like real estate or hotels, that chunk of it totally revolutionized as well. The last two big ones to go are video and education because they both need broadband. And that's the only reason. That's the only thing that's holding it back. And they're both going now. And, the man on the street or the woman on the street knows video is going. It's intuitively obvious to them they'll be able to watch Titanic on their wristwatch in a couple of years. It's not intuitively obvious to them that education's going, but it should be. Because, in fact, education's way further ahead. There are a bunch of companies making billions of dollars in online education right now with really just effectively PowerPoint technology. And as video and broadband are increasingly promulgated around the world, those floodgates are going to open. There's no resisting this wave. Online education is going to transform the industry. It's going to transform the world. And so that's great. I think if as a species we manage this right, it's going to be incredible for the human race. It's 1.25 billion people, 1 billion of them don't finish high school. That's that's a sea change in the whole history of the human race, before and after, like indoor plumbing or the Industrial Revolution. And it'll help everybody. It'll help create incredible global wealth. It'll help create scientific advances. It'll help all of us. It's a wonderful thing. It's such a big thing, actually. It's such a positive. It's hard to actually quantify how big it is. Like it's just amazing. And so a lot of people are going to focus on the distribution side, which is as it should be. And the other thing that the internet does, though, really well is data mining. You can personalize via data mining. And that's a very powerful thing as well. So let me talk about data mining. That's near and dear to my heart. And I don't know why I love data mining so much. My brain is just wired a little oddly, and I just happen to love this stuff. I just think it's totally fascinating. I just see patterns. In the 19th century, they would have thrown me in an insane asylum, I guess. I just see hidden patterns. And here's what I see for data mining. 30 years from now, the world will be so utterly data mined, it'll be unrecognizable to us. Children will laugh at today's children that they didn't live in that world. The way today's children laugh at us if we ever went to a Tower Records. Just laugh. It'll just be absurd. Like, your life is idiotic. I'm so sorry for you. That kind of laughter. It'll be, your refrigerator knows when you're out of eggs and just buys them for you. By the way, that should be happening already. I don't understand why that hasn't happened yet. That should happen. That'll start happening in a few years. It's a mystery to me because that technology already exists. It'll be, here's one that will happen soon, and if anyone wants to start this company, I'll help you fund it, because I would do this myself, but I'm busy with Knewton. Insurance, big insurance. Take the combined, freely available data set of all of your social information on the internet, your Facebook profile, the pictures on there, your news feeds, what kind of friends you have, the stuff you click on the stuff you say on Twitter, the stuff you retweet on Twitter, the people who follow you on Twitter, whom you follow on Twitter, LinkedIn. That's just the easy stuff, the legal stuff. You can get all that. Okay. I could probably come up with like a dozen other things that are much more obscure, but just take those big three. It should be obvious to everyone here that take the combined data set, that the correlation of that with your risk profile can't possibly be zero. And it's free. Why don't all the big insurance companies just spider this stuff right now? I mean, insurance premiums, it's so stupid. I mean, everybody pays the same rate. Really, in this day and age, it doesn't make any sense. Insurance has always done big data. It's just done it really badly. It's just done it pre-internet. And pretty soon they're going to figure out how to do it post-internet. You're in your car, you're driving. The insurance company can tell you're driving because you're moving, right, GPS. They can tell you're texting while you're driving. Oh, man. Why aren't they doing something about that? It'll make all of us safer. That'll come in 5 years. That's just big companies moving slowly, but it'll come. That's inevitable. Tom Cruise walking through the mall in Minority Report. Hey, Joe Hamilton, whatever his name was, I don't remember. It's time for that Caribbean vacation you've been thinking about. I don't remember what the ad was. I know people are working on that technology right now. It's a combination of, so there's a team at MIT who's working on tight narrowband audio and image. So people in the same room can watch a TV, this exact same TV, and they're watching different things and hearing different things. They're not wearing headphones. So narrowband audio going to you, a different narrowband audio going to you. And depending on what angle you're viewing the TV at, you're watching a totally different show. People are working on that technology right now. That's what happens in Minority Report. Steven Spielberg got people to tell him what was coming, and they told him about that, and they married that with big data, and he gets a personalized ad. Just while he's walking through the mall. That'll happen. Those are just the examples that we can predict now. There'll be many, many more we can't predict. So I'm going to get a little technical here, but big data is just in its infancy. How are we doing for time?
We're doing fine.
Great.
10 minutes?
Okay, sure. So big data is still in its infancy. It's really just getting started. There's really only a few industries that have done anything in big data. And the reason for that is that that it's hard. It's always been hard to get data out of an industry, right? How do you get data? Well, to do it cost efficiently, you need to do it algorithmically. You need to do it passively, which means really you sort of need to do it on the internet. Now we have big data already. We have it in insurance. We talked about that. That's a big data industry. It's just a pre-internet one. We have it in education. It's called standardized tests. That's big data. I'm getting 3 hours of data using IRT or whatnot when you take the SAT or the GMAT. Okay. But when you can put it on a mobile device or a tablet, then you can passively mine much more data. Okay, so it shouldn't be surprised then that the earliest big data companies are internet companies, because that's where it's easiest to get the data, right? So Netflix, Amazon, Google, Facebook, Pandora, those are big data companies. Actually, I've never used Pandora, so don't call me on my bluff on that one. I've been told they use big data. And they get very little data per user per day. So there's a few terms that are going to enter the big data vernacular that are not in it now or not commonly used. At least no one else seems to use them. Data per user per day is a big one. The more data per user per day you have, the more personalizable a product is. Right? I mean actual data. I don't mean dividing everything into finer grains of seconds of no meaningful difference in activity. I mean actionable data. Actionable data per user per day. That's going to be the name of the game. All right, so how does big data right now stack up? I mean, this is the entire future of the human race. It's going to be totally consumed with this. So this is just the very beginning of it. Well, Netflix and Amazon get probably less than one actionable data point per user per day. They get very little data. Okay, and Google and Facebook probably get in the tens of actionable data per user per day. A typical Google search, I've been told by people who work at Google, is about 10 data points. And what you click on, what you don't, obviously what you don't click on is a lot. What you click on, did you come back right away? What's your lat long? Because they can geolocate you. Okay, so there are three variables that make up data per user per day. How big is so big data is about assessing chunks and then making a recommendation. So if you're Palantir, which assesses, Palantir is a big data company that maybe the world's leading big data company that works with the CIA and Fortune 500 companies. It's basically trying to tease out. Some people claim it's the reason America hasn't been attacked again since 9/11. Some people with high clearance claim that. Who knows if it's true or not. But it's basically like the NSA is actually not doing that work. Palantir is doing that work. Right? That's the group that's really, really smart that's actually doing the work. That's Palantir. They're brilliant. And somebody in big data is assessing chunks and then making a recommendation. Now, in the case of Palantir, they're just going to making a recommendation, I guess, algorithmically, and then there's some analyst is looking at it and they're making, they're passing that off to someone in government or corporate hierarchy. But for consumer web companies, the recommendation is then another chunk. So you assess chunks and then you recommend chunks. So you watch movies in Netflix and then the algorithm recommends another movie. You look at products or buy products on Amazon and recommends another product. Okay. In all these industries, so it's the same with Google, Pages recommends a web page. So you have three variables. How big is the chunk? How many chunks are there in an industry, in a field? And what is the correlation between those chunks? Across all three of those dimensions, the existing big data companies, through no fault of their own, are in exactly the wrong place. There are relatively few chunks in Amazon or Netflix or Google or Facebook. Very, very few. And the chunks are gargantuan, by my standards anyway. A product on Amazon or a movie on Netflix or a web page. Those are huge chunks. And the correlations are almost, from my perspective, they're very, very low. 10 or 20 or 30%. The only time Amazon gets a good correlation is if you're like me and you love Lee Child, the Jack Reacher books, and it's like, I don't know, he's got to be like on number 50 now. I bought every single one on Amazon. I'm clearly going to buy the next one. Okay, so that's like 100% or 99%. But other than those weird exceptions, Amazon's correlations and Netflix and Google's, 10, 20, 30%. They're very low correlations. So giant chunks, relatively few chunks, very poor correlations. Education and healthcare are totally different. They have minute chunks. They have a vast number of chunks. And the correlations between those chunks can be extremely high. And that is why we started Knewton. So what does that mean? You're doing a bunch of work in the morning. You're doing some classwork. You're learning subject-verb agreement. Never learned it properly, and the system identifies that, and so it's going to give you a little bit more in real time. All right, well, there's 5 or 10 concepts that are 99% correlated to this concept. If we determine you learn subject-verb agreement best in the morning between 9:13 and 10:42 a.m., with 23 minutes worth of content, because at the 24-minute mark, you clearly get bored. Your click rate goes up. You start missing easy questions. And you learn it best with a blend of 85% text and 15% video. And we know that because we're giving you normed practice questions, so we know exactly what your proficiencies are afterwards. So we know how fast you're learning and how well you're learning. To the percentile, plus or minus a few points versus the rest of the population. We know how well you learned a concept. And over time, we know what your retention was of that concept. So if you learn something better a certain way in terms of retention, we can measure that too. So whatever you're learning, down to the atomic concept, we're measuring that. We're measuring how fast you learned it, how well you learned it, in what way you learned it, and how long you retained it, what media format, time of day, all of it. Now, for any one of those concepts, there's a bunch of concepts that are extremely highly correlated. There's probably 10 that are 99% correlated and another 10 that are 98% correlated. We have to go way down before we get to concepts that are like 20% correlated, like Amazon has. It's like we don't even have to bother with that. And so what that means is if we know that you learn this concept best this way, this exact way, then all those 10 things you're going to learn best that exact same way as well. You got one of them coming up next week. We should just give it to you this way. So through inferred data, when you've got small chunks and very high correlations, you produce cascade effects, exponentially more data via inference. But it's extremely reliable. And that's what Knewton does. So it's not the fault of online search or social networking or online e-tailing that they can only get a few data points per user per day. It's just the nature of those products. The nature of education is you can generate vastly more data per user per day. In fact, Knewton today generates up to 10 million actionable data per user per day. A lot of it's indirect, of course. We're getting 5 orders of magnitude more data than Google gets on a per user per day basis. In fact, I think it's safe to say that Knewton gets more data per user per day than any other company in the world gets about anybody about anything, and it's not close. And next year we think it's going to go up several orders of magnitude more because we're still getting, right now we're still messing around in like the 99, 98, 97, kind of in the high 90s in terms of correlation. We're just ignoring everything else. And next year we'll get a little bit smarter and our algorithms will get better. We'll be able to drill down into the 80s and the 70s. We need more data points, but we're getting those too. So that's the world of education that's coming. Totally transparent learning outcomes. Now, it's fair to say that, that those learning outcomes can only be transparent where there's some measurable objective. So Newton stops and big data stops in education where people can't agree on the right answer, which is actually where the fun begins. But we can do all that dirty work. So where people agree on the right answer, where it's robotically teachable, right, where nobody disagrees on the right answer, then big data can teach it faster, teach it more efficiently than a student just learning on his or her own in a somewhat guided way or a somewhat random way. And hopefully what you can do then is you can give analytics to professors like, well, here's exactly, that student's not bad at physics. That student is learning these concepts faster than any one of your other students. It's just that his second language is English. And that's what's slowing him down. And I can prove it to you mathematically. Or what about the student who doesn't hand in homework? This is one of my favorite bagatelles. Well, a student who doesn't hand in homework all semester, and maybe you've always graded by handing in homework or whatever. And maybe bombs the midterm even. All right, and then final rolls around. And she gets the highest, she gets a perfect score. And that's all you'd be able to tell before. But now Newton can tell you she learned this stuff faster than anybody else at a deep level of proficiency. She knows it better than anyone else in the country. So, hypothetical example, but this will be true of someone. She learned it, she knows it better. She knows these concepts at a deeper level of proficiency than any other student in America. She learned them faster, she retains them longer. She's a prodigy. She's a genius. You're going to give her a C because she didn't hand her homework? She learned it the last day of the course. Who cares how she learned it or why she learned it? She knows it, and she knows it better than any other student you have ever had. You're going to give her a C because that's the way you've always done it. We had a student at Arizona State who we told the school after 14 days she's going to get an A on the final. You can give it to her now. And they did. And she got an A. Now, in the whole history of time up until now, they would have kept her in that seat all semester long. It's totally boring and alienating to her. It's a waste of ASU's resources. So they moved to a modular semester structure. Now she can get out after 2 weeks. So that's the future. And hopefully what that'll do is get students better ready for class so they can come in and do the really good stuff. We can teach you all the facts and the simple critical thinking skills surrounding the causes of the Civil War. And then you can get into class and have a debate on, states' rights versus slavery. The really good stuff, the stuff that makes human beings human beings. Let Newton do the dirty work or big data so you can get to that stuff. We've been going the opposite direction as a society over the last few decades. We're teaching much more of the rote stuff in class. That doesn't make any sense, especially not in a knowledge economy, right? We got to teach people how to think, right? Because you can't teach people, in the 1800s, there were guilds in Europe. People apprenticed to be a whatever, and they apprenticed for, because they knew that those jobs would be around forever. We have no idea what the hot job's going to be in 10 years. we've got to teach people how to think now. So I think that's most of my prepared comments, and at this point, I've made so many wildly provocative comments, I should probably leave more time for questions.
I would just ask you again to, first of all, thank you, Jose, for stimulating thoughts there. But if you have a question, would you mind coming up to the microphone, and we'll engage in some dialogue. So thanks. I know Kyle can't be too far behind here. Thoughts? Okay. It's your needs. So I have one maybe just to get us started off. I'm wondering what in this new economy, as you're describing it in the academy, what roles will change for ROLES, will change for faculty members, for students, and so forth? How does that dynamic look?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the things, in terms of the distribution side, faculty will be able to reach many more students over the internet, and some will find that very appealing. You know, I went to a small liberal arts college where, at Carleton College in Minnesota, I had classes with 12 people in them. I thought that was great. So those faculty members probably self-selected because that would have sounded awful to them. But, you can still maybe teach some of those smaller classes locally, and you might be able to teach some classes over the internet. So there'll be choices to be made, and some professors will find they're really good at it and like it, and some will find that they're not so good at it. And, there'll always be a role for the professors who aren't good at it to, just do the live in-person teaching. In terms of the kind of the data mining side of it, the personalization side, we're producing reports right now that can tell you, so inbound student, you've got an inbound cohort of people who, all took Knewton last semester. And we can tell you to the percentile what the strengths and weaknesses are in every concept that they had last semester. We can tell you this group is primarily a visual group. You may just want to know that, adjust your teaching style, diagram more stuff for them. We can tell you this group is going to struggle in week 3. There's just no way they're not going to struggle in week 3. Week 3 introduces concepts that build on concepts that they're not good at, and we know for a fact they're not good at them. So they're going to struggle with that. So we can tell you that. We can tell the publisher that. We tell publishers things like, your content is weak in week 3. Weak because there's not enough of it, because you've got kind of the same amount of content for every week, but the students across the country consistently need more content in week 3. Or maybe because the learning outcomes in the week 3's worth of content aren't very good. This is a pretty good textbook. Most learning outcomes week in and week out are pretty good, but it dips in week 3. The content's not as good. That's good news for the publisher, because in the past, I used to build courses at Kaplan. In the past, you had to kind of spread all your effort evenly over a course, which is horribly expensive. So expensive, you didn't really want to do it very much. Now you can just say, no, you got a burning problem in week 3. Fix that. The rest of the course is great. Don't throw it out, or don't just revise the whole thing. That's a waste. Just fix week 3. So it's changing content creation. It's changing instructional design dramatically, because right now instructional design is, you build a default instructional design. You target it to the mean, whether you intend to or not. You are. There's obviously, as bad as a target to the mean is, doing anything else would be even worse, right? So you target it to the mean. That means that by definition, your instructional design is too hard for half the class and too easy for half the class. So, that's going to change, because, we can tell you things like, well, again, you're struggling, this instructional design is breaking in week 3. It's fantastic in week 6. And so you get real-time information. You can change it on the fly. Don't move on past week 4. They're stuck. They're never going to learn anything in the back half of the course because they're being blocked by these concepts over here. Make sure they get extra time in that. And of course, those are just very gross examples. In fact, it's much more specific to individuals. Like, this student over here, or this 23% of your class is going to be stuck until you get them some help with this, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot more information now. That all sounds intimidating. We've deliberately built the system so you can just ignore all that stuff, ignore all the data, and they just go home and they get a smart textbook instead of a one-size-fits-all textbook. So you can do that, but you're going to start getting this information if you want to use it.
Please, yes.
I was going to ask you, how do you think the role of the faculty is going to change in the structure of the curriculum, and how do you think we should prepare?
I think there are a couple of things. Faculty will get more information. It's a kind of building on the last answer. They'll get more information, and they'll be able to bring personalization into the classroom much more. So you've got a student that's just a mystery to you. A student who seems so brilliant, but he's struggling. You can't figure out why. So you're going to get a lot more information out to help that student. In terms of teaching style, ASU's done some interesting work on this. And they've tried to measure the number of concepts that a random cohort of students, because they're so big, they've got like 10 cohorts taking the exact same class. So they did some work on teaching style. A random cohort, for this professor, what is the teaching style? And by the teaching style, I mean, when are they learning their concepts? When over the 3 or 4 months of the semester are they learning their concepts? And it's fascinating. Some professors seem to front-load concepts. Like the students seem to learn everything all at once. So imagine this is over time, and here's a graph. And so they're really high. They're learning tons of stuff in the first few weeks, and then it kind of drifts down. Now, this is where statistics, is art and science. Someone's got to, I don't ever trust statistics unless I give them a good think in terms of like what that actually means. Is it the case that professor is, well, I'm just so great, I can just teach everything in the first half of the course, and they do. They're not saying this out loud, but that's actually what's happening. And because they've been told to teach it in an entire semester, well, they're kind of like run out of stuff to do. Is that what's happening? Or is it that, is there something else going on? And there are other professors, it's kind of the opposite. It's kind of like it starts slow and it ends high. And is that because the professor just kind of was disorganized and like had to kind of catch up at the end? I mean, maybe. Maybe it's the case that the professor's teaching has a very kind of conceptual framework that gets introduced in the first few weeks, which allows concepts to be absorbed much faster in the back half of the course. Maybe that's happening. So, and then there are others that are kind of like the waves, the water. It just kind of, it goes up and then it comes down, it goes up again. That appears to just be that the professor's not doing anything particular. It's just the quizzes along the way are doing the work and getting the students up for those. But what's fascinating is it's early days still in their work and their analysis of this. What's fascinating is each professor appears to have a unique style. And it appears to be very consistent from semester to semester. So there'll be some kind of there'll be tools like that are very limited tools still, but kind of interesting and worthy of a little reflection. Ideally, what we'd like to see is that professors are just able to adjust on the fly much more, either on a class basis or an individual basis. Professors have always created custom textbooks. They've just done it in a bricks and mortar way. Like skip that chapter or skip that problem set and do this one instead. And this, with online distribution of resources, you can now do it in a seamless, customized way, so that'll be better for everybody. But you'll also be able to interfere. It's like a Heisenberg thing. You can interfere with the experiment now. You don't have to just build it all at once and then let it go. You can, you start getting real-time data and you can adjust in real time. And hopefully, with better robotic teaching for the dumb stuff, for the dirty work, you'll get better prepared students who just kind of hopefully just create an inflationary movement upwards, make jobs easier.
My head is spinning. I'm a kid in a candy store. So many different things I'd like to ask and talk about. So I guess I'm just going to ask a high-level question and see where you take it. So one of the things I really like that you said is when these new technologies come out, first it increases access in places where that's not available. And it also improves quality in places where it is. I agree with that, believe that. I think MOOCs and digital badges and other things are changing that. You've obviously thought a lot about higher education and where we are headed. What is the future you see, just even 5, 10 years down the road? Do courses still exist as 18-week-long bundles? Is the content is deliveries unbundled from assessment? Are they things people need to know and be able to do unbundled from each other? Are prior learning assessment? Terrible question, but a guy like you seem ready for it.
Okay, well, I'll do my best. It's a fascinating question. I think a lot about content in general and what information technology does to content, and it has a strong unbundling tendency on content. So when I grew up, we had the 3 TV stations, the 3 networks, and that was your bundle. And then we got to cable, and you all of a sudden had many more networks, and those 3 were unbundled, and all of a sudden you had a network that was just devoted to food. Well, I don't know if the Food Network you can even call it that anymore, but you had one that's just devoted to music or just devoted to science, or a bunch of now they're just devoted to science, and that's unbundling further. The DVR has unbundled that much further. Now I don't pay attention to networks anymore. I just tape shows. My DVR record. I can produce my own channel. And I promise you that the next phase in the unbundling of video content will be within the show. Because you'll be able to, in a few years, maybe not a few, maybe not 3 or 4, but maybe 6 to 8. DVRs will be able to just record the snippets of a show that talks about the stuff you care about. Oh, the evening news has a story on Russia, and I just slavishly follow all the Russian news, so it's going to record that 5-minute clip for me. Right? It'll be unbundling. It'll break the show. There's nothing magical about the network, or the cable network, or the show. They can be unbundled further. Well, there's nothing magical about the semester. So that's your intuition. Of course, you're right. And so there are constraints imposed upon us by distribution networks, because where content is very expensive to distribute, like online, like video content through networks, the kind of the artifices of the distribution machine impose some bundling upon us, and we accept it. And that's education as well. And as it becomes easier to distribute, bundling breaks down. It's just a law of physics. People don't think of it that way, but that's really all it is. It's just a law of the universe. And so online education is going to represent ease of distribution, and that will tend to unbundle education. So you'll have a bunch of people. What are the manifestations of that? Well, some people won't enroll in a particular college. I mean, I know it sounds idiotic, but there will be DIY students who just take a bunch of online courses, and they say, why are you asking me what degree I went to? Like, it's so old-fashioned of you, employer. Look at what I did. And then there'll be people within schools who do some DIY, but then they do it within the auspices of a school. And then within courses, that's kind of like that's the education version of unbundling within the show. I have a hard time imagining a world anytime soon where people just say, I'm only interested in this 2 weeks, Professor Jones, and then I'm just here for those 2 weeks because this is stuff I really care about. And then there's no reason why that can't happen, but that just seems pretty far away.
I just wanted to sort of say you see a bright future for Penn State. So do I. Do you see a time where we might sell parallel products? So you might be able to come here and get a degree and take courses in semesters and do that. But we might also sell badges. We might take chunks out of courses. You were talking about being able to break down sections out of things, and so it seems like a way for a university to move from where we are to where we might be is to start selling additional products. Sort of thoughts on that?
That's a great question. That's totally fascinating. So I do see a world where that'll happen, especially as it pertains to these kind of lifelong learners and all around the world who just need the they're taking a financial accounting course, but they don't care about the American bits of it because they live in the English system. But they're going to take those bits, and there'll be that. And I can imagine an all-you-can-eat model where if I don't want to take the MOOC because I can take a relatively inexpensive one from Penn State and it's much better, production values are much higher, and so forth. I might do that, and you might say, well, we can increase this audience if we actually reduce this into chunks, into modules, and let people buy the ones that they want. If they buy all 4, they get for the entire what would have been the entire course, they get a scaled discount. I can imagine that happening, but I can't imagine it happening very soon for the following reason: there's so much money to be made just simply selling credits and degrees around the world, where people will take the existing units and happily buy them. You're just going to be focused, and rushing into that, there's just no reason to invent new form factors or products, and the existing form factors, are just waiting to be distributed. I went to, I was lucky enough to go to Harvard Business School. I don't know why they admitted me. I came out of Kaplan, so I was like the kid in the first day of, with under the tent, the cocktail party, and I'm like, where do you work? Goldman Sachs. Where do you work? Kaplan. Oh. And they'd literally walk away. And Harvard kids aren't subtle about that kind of stuff. But they would literally walk away. So anyway, where was I going with this whole Kaplan
You
Korean?
said we won't do that anytime soon because there's a lot of money to be made selling the old full product.
Yeah, it's the brand. When I was at Harvard, I used to hear in marketing class, this is a kind of a truism there, that Coca-Cola is the strongest brand in the world. They had a few truisms. One was Toyota is the best manufacturing company in the world. Everybody used to repeat that while I was there. I don't know if they're saying that now because it's come down a few notches. But back then they say that. They say Coke was the strongest brand in the world. That's nonsense. The strongest brand in the world is Harvard. The strongest brands in the world are higher education brands. And it's not close. No one cares if their daughter drinks a Coke or Pepsi. Not really. They care desperately where their daughter goes to school. Bless you. Desperately. They'll do anything to get their daughter to go to a better school. the strongest brands in the world are the higher education brands. And through purely arbitrary reasons, the capital expense of it, they have been capacity constrained. The supply side of higher education has been extremely constrained for arbitrary reasons. That constraint is now lifted. So you can take the Harvard brand, or the Princeton or Oxford or whatever. You can take those brands and you can sell them all over the world. You can, and those elite schools will do that, but they won't do it as fast as quickly as you will do it, and they don't do it at the kind of scale that the big state schools will do it at. And they're going to be so nervous about their brand that they will slow them down, which is foolish, because if you understand game theory, you realize as soon as the first one or two do it, the rest of them have to do it, and they will do it. And when they all do it, there's no brand implications anymore, because whatever implications are affecting all of them equally. So if you play the game theory out, it is inevitable that they will all do it. Because in a large system of extremely competitive institutions, no matter how powerful their brand is, once a few of them do it, the rest of them have to. No one, not even Harvard, can tolerate Yale making $1 billion or $2 billion a year in online revenue, which Yale could make. Any of them could. So they're all going to go. It's this lifting of the capacity constraint, which is maybe one of the single most interesting things that's going to happen. If you have to summarize a narrative that's going to happen in higher education over the next decade, is the entirety of human history up until now, the university system has been artificially capacity constrained. The most powerful brands in the world, artificially capacity constrained. Now the capacity constraint is gone, and no one probably knows what to do yet. But a few people are popping their heads up, and it's a giant world, and they're going to make a lot of money and do a lot of social good at the same time.
So you talked about the critical idea of teaching thinking skills, not basic information, comprehension, understanding, and moving that before class so that you could spend class time practicing thinking or getting over the rough spots. That's what we call just-in-time teaching in some areas. But where does the assessment happen? Who does it? I know it doesn't have to be in class, but I'm hoping you're not suggesting we only assess the basic knowledge, standardized testing, no matter customized as they might be. So how and when are we going to assess thinking skills?
I'm sorry, what?
Thinking skills and use of the new knowledge.
Great question. Thank you. So in a Newton-powered world, you need less assessment because we passively norm assessment items. So ETS or ACT, they spend tens of thousands of dollars on every assessment item they create. Not in writing it. That just takes a kid in a cubicle a few minutes. It's the adding the statistical parameters to the item and then understanding the statistics and testing and curating it. That's what takes the money. Standardized tests are just statistics dressed up in question format in exactly the same way as Las Vegas is statistics dressed up in games format. And if you carefully calibrate the statistics and know exactly what you're doing, you can kind of rig the game. That's what standardized, to a particular outcome. That's what standardized tests do. And we can now do that passively. We can passively norm all of your items. So we're passively norming all of these publishers' items that we work with, right up to ETS level quality. So we know exactly. We just do it for free because we can do it over the internet. And we don't have the security concerns that they have, but we can do it at scale. We can do it at a very large scale. So, and professors, when we're launching a retail platform early next year that any professor can just jump into right away, and you can just basically say, for students who just need a little extra help with osmosis, go to Knewton, click on osmosis. It's totally free content, OER content. You get the full power of Knewton. It's just a few days worth of content for that student who's struggling in that area. It'll be totally free. And you'll be able to use that as a professor as a portal to add your own content, and if we're powering what you're using on campus, then you'll be able to seamlessly integrate that content. And then what you can do is you can basically get Knewton norming your items for free. Whatever you've created, we can norm that for free. Okay, great. We're generating so much data per user per day. So remember, ETS is big. The standardized tests are big data for education. They're just bricks and mortar big data. They get 3 hours once in your life. We get 3 hours every day. Right? So we're getting tons more data than a big test maker gets. And there's an exponential effect of all that data. So we get lots of that. And so we can basically tell you at any given point in time, well, here's how good the student is at the concepts. Right? And we can predict how good they're going to be at concepts they haven't even seen yet, based on the correlation between, and based on how other students would assume a profile, because we're constantly doing that kind of pattern matching. So we can do all the assessment of the rote stuff, the basic, the kind of the objective stuff. We can do that, and there's no particular reason to give tests anymore about that stuff. Now, of course, a grade is way more than just how good you are at the facts and processes and simple critical thinking skills, right? It's that stuff, sure, but the reason you teach that stuff is so that you can really teach this stuff, and that's the art of education. No one's going to, there's art. There's always a balance in many industries and complex systems between art and science, right? And we're adding to the science part of it, but the art part is with the magic, and that's where the important stuff happens. And the professor's still going to control that. And so, you'll decide on that however you like. You'll have your own. It'll be essays or class participation or whatever it'll be. It'll be non-scalable, non-algorithmically gradable assessment, and that'll be and you will determine for yourself how important that part of the grade is versus the robotic part. I guess that's it. It was a wonderful audience. Thank you so much for coming on a hot July day. I appreciate
Thank you
it.
for your insights. This has been just wonderful. Thank you.